my goodness. Oh, what's up, Charleston? You know, I ate with Rodney Scott today. I'm very happy. And Pastor Holt, I want to thank you for the warm welcome and for your leadership and all that you do. I'm so happy to be here. I am so happy to be here. How's everybody doing? Well, it's good to be in the Palmetto State. So this is my first event in the great state of South Carolina since I announced 3 weeks ago. And I plan on spending a lot of time and coming back. So this is the first of hopefully many visits and opportunities to talk. But I will tell you, especially at this stage of the campaign, I'm here to listen as much as I am to talk. So I'm going to share a few thoughts, and then we're going to open it up, Brady, for a conversation and take questions. Because truly, when we look at the challenges that our country faces today, I think we know that there are so many folks who need to be heard and seen and their voices elevated. And I think the true sign of leadership is to hear what the people want and to be relevant. Because I'm going to tell you, I intend to win this election. But the measure of success, as far as I'm concerned, for our campaign, will not only be about winning, but at the end of the road, also ensuring that we are relevant. Relevant in the lives of people other than ourselves. And so, so since I announced 3 weeks ago in my hometown of Oakland, California, people have been asking me, well, Kamala, why are you running? And I'll tell you, part of why I'm running is I believe we need to restore the promise of opportunity in America, restore everyone's access, equal access to a path toward success and opportunity. For so many people in America today, that path is not clear, it is not available. For so many people in our country today, we are looking at the fact that the American dream, much less American values, are under attack, and it is time to change course. I was raised by a mother. My sister Maya is here. We were raised by a mother. We'd come home with a problem, and my mother, the first thing she'd do is look at us and say, well, what are you going to do about fixing it? So I'm here to say I decided to run for president. Because part of the reason for doing this is we also have to restore in our country truth and justice. Truth and justice. My parents met when they were active in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. We joke that we were raised by a bunch of adults who spent full time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. And what we know is that in America today, there are too many people who have been deprived of justice. There is too much that is happening by this administration that is depriving people of justice and is not a reflection of our true values as a nation. When we look at a policy that gave $1 trillion to big corporations and the top 1%, that is not justice. When we look at babies that are being taken from their mothers and fathers at the border in the name of border security when it is in fact a human rights abuse, that is not justice. When we look at the fact that in America today, a mother or a father has to sit down with their 12-year-old son and talk to him about how he may be arrested, he may be stopped, he may be assaulted, and he may be shot because of the color of his skin. That is not justice. And we also have to speak truth about what is happening in our country. We have to speak truth. We have to speak truth that right now this economy is not working for working people. Let's speak that truth. Let's speak the truth that when almost half of American families cannot afford a $400 emergency, and that medical bills are the leading cause of bankruptcy, we know we have work to do, but let's speak truth and let that inform public policy. Instead of people playing politics with our health care, instead of people not understanding health care is a right, it should not be a privilege of the few. Let's speak those truths. Let's speak truth that the reality of what is going on in our country tells us, and I was there at Mother Emanuel Church, I visited today, racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia are real in this country. Let's speak those truths so we can deal with it. Let's speak truth. And I don't have to tell South Carolina this because you already know it. Let's speak truth. We're a society that pretends to care about education, but not so much the education of other people's children. Let's speak that truth so we can deal with it. Let's speak truth. We're looking at what's going on around offshore drilling here. Let's speak truth. Climate change is real. And we're not about to buy the people who are trying to sell us science fiction when we need science fact. Let's speak these truths. And let's also, in this moment in time, when we have so many powerful voices that are trying to sow hate and division among us, let's speak one of the most fundamental truths. The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. Let's speak that truth. Let's speak that truth. Because as we move forward in this fight for truth and justice, I think it is critically, critically important that we remember. You know, people say, oh, we need to search for common ground. Yo, we're standing on common ground. We're standing on common ground. We have so much more in common than what separates us. I know it to be true. You know the way I think of it? I think of it based on what people call, you know, the middle of the night thought. Some people call it the 3 in the morning thought. Some people call it the witching hour. You know, that moment where you wake up in the middle of the night with that thought that's been weighing on you. Sometimes you wake up in a cold sweat with that thought. Well, for the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it is never through the lens of the party with which we're registered to vote. When we wake up thinking that thought, it is never through the lens of some demographic a pollster put us in. And for the vast majority of us, when we wake up thinking that thought, it has to do with one of just a very few things. Our personal health, the health of our children or our parents. For so many Americans, can I get a job, keep a job, pay the bills by the end of the month, retire with dignity? For our students, can I pay off those student loans? The vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. So as we fight this good fight, born out of optimism, born with the belief that we can achieve those ideals upon which our country was founded, those ideals that were behind the writing of the Constitution of the United States and all of its amendments, the ideals that were present in the writing of the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, and those words we spoke in 1776, that we are all and should be treated that way. Let's remember this is a fight to achieve those ideals. And let's be clear-eyed about it. The strength of our nation is that we are aspirational. We know what we can be unburdened by what we have been. We are aspirational and we are clear-eyed. We know we've not quite met those ideals. We know we've got a lot of work to do to actually achieve those ideals. But the strength of our nation is we fight to get there. And so that's what this fight is about. That's what this fight is about. And it is therefore a fight that is not against something. It's a fight that is for something. And it is a fight born out of love of country and knowing what we can be and that we are better than this. We are better than this. And so my last point, and then I'd like us to open it up for a conversation. My last point is this. It's an inflection moment. It's an inflection moment in the history of our country. It's an inflection moment in the history of the world. The world is changing around us. This is a moment where we are being challenged to look in a mirror and ask who we are. And part of the answer, yes, is that we are better than this. And in this inflection moment, this is a moment to ask, who are we as a country in terms of our standing on the globe, in the world, in relation to our neighbors and our allies and our adversaries? This is a moment where we have to talk about and ask, are we proud of who we are and who we can be, and can we be better? It's an inflection moment. And years from now, our children and our grandchildren and others will look in each of our eyes and they will ask us, where were you at that inflection moment? And what we're all going to be able to say is we were hanging out in Charleston together. And our answer will not be limited to how we felt at this moment. Our answer will be about what we did, what action we took, how we decided to stand up, to step out, to speak up, to participate, to vote, to organize, to empower, to uplift, and to speak for our country and our ideals, born out of love of country, knowing we are better than this, knowing that there is so much we can do, and we will do it together. So thank you. Thank you, Charleston. Thank you. And so with that, so I want to hear from everybody now.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I want to start, and then we're going to ask some questions from the audience, but I want to start with a tough question. What was your favorite item at Rodney Scott's today for lunch? This is important.
That hog, but let me tell you, his greens and the cornbread, because he's got butter and honey on top of it. Oh, it's so good. And then my sister loved the banana pudding, because you got to have those crackers. Like, you have to have those vanilla wafers. You can't do banana pudding without that.
That's right. I love it.
So it was really good. I'm going to be back. And the vinegar-based sauce. Yeah, that is really, and he makes his own, and then he has this other one that he just says is the other sauce.
It's good.
But it was lovely, and his wife Coco and their son. It was really a nice visit.
I love it. Well, the great part about Charleston is there's lots more barbecue, so you're welcome back anytime. We're glad. So I want to start, we're sitting not just in a historic church, but a historic area. We're a mile or two from where Walter Scott was murdered by police officers. We're in an area where there is regular gun violence, and we're just off the anniversary of the Parkland shooting. It seems like gun violence is something that's in the news a lot, but one of the questions that we get is, what can we do about it? What would you do as president to address these injustices?
Right. Part of what I would do is support the closing of the Charleston loophole. It is only practical that there would be a waiting period so there can be a review. Part of what we've got to do on this issue, and I'm just going to go in terms of the issue as a whole. Listen, we're not waiting for another tragedy to figure out that we need smart gun safety laws. Because we've seen every tragedy that we can imagine, from 26 and 7-year-old babies being massacred in Connecticut to what happened right here at Mother Emanuel, right? We know that America has been offered a false choice on gun safety laws. The false choice suggesting you're either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everybody's guns away. That's a false choice. It's not true. That's not what has to happen. And they've got to stop selling that, and we're not going to buy it. Because here's the reality about smart gun safety laws. We're not waiting for a tragedy for smart gun safety laws. We don't need another tragedy. We've had the worst tragedies we can imagine. We're not waiting for good ideas. Because guess what? There's some good ideas. Closing the Charleston loophole is one. Another one, universal background checks. So what is a universal background check? But let's be clear about what it is. It's really basic. If you've been found by a court to be a danger to yourself or others, we might want to know before we sell you a gun. That's just logical. If you've been found by a court to commit acts of violence, we might want to know before we sell you a lethal weapon. That's just logical. An assault weapons ban. These are weapons of war. We've seen assault weapons kill babies and police officers. There is no need for assault weapons in a civil society. We don't need them. Let's ban them. These are reasonable, good ideas. So here's the thing. People can't say, well, maybe if there's a real tragedy, we'll have smart gun safety laws. No. Well, maybe we're waiting for a good idea. No. Here's the thing. What we're waiting for is members of the United States Congress to have the courage to stand up and pass smart gun safety laws. That's what we're waiting for. And as president, what I would do is absolutely sign and support and actually advocate for what we need to do and be smart. And remember, guys, we once, not very long ago, had an assault weapons ban. Everybody was fine. In terms of those people who are saying it shouldn't happen, they were fine. People can go hunting, people can go and have licensed use of guns for sport. That didn't stop anybody.
That's right.
So, but when I am president, I will be advocating for small gun safety laws.
I love it. Thank you. So I want to dovetail on that. You were talking about members of Congress doing things. One of the things that I think a lot of people here want to know is we're going to have a lot of folks who want to be the president come through Charleston and talk a lot about their plans. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about you is you have a long track record of performing, of hitting those marks. And so I think yesterday or a couple days ago, you passed some landmark legislation around lynching. Can you talk about your record of actually getting things done in the Congress? Because I think that matters to a lot of folks.
So yesterday, and let me just as a preface to this point say that I do also firmly believe some of the most intractable, biggest issues that face us as a nation are not even capable of bipartisan work. They're actually nonpartisan, and we need folks to understand and appreciate that. So yesterday we have an example of an appreciation of that point, which is that through a unanimous vote in your United States Senate, Republicans and Democrats and independents all agreed that we are 200 years late, but finally got to the point of recognizing lynching is a federal crime. And the way that I feel about, and it was our bill that we got Senator Booker and Senator Scott co-sponsored with me. And what it will do is finally acknowledge a part of a stain on America's history. And there are many scenes of that crime, including right here in South Carolina. It was about recognizing we had 200 years plus of slavery, we had Jim Crow, we had legalized segregation and discrimination, and now we still have it, but it is not legal, but it still happens. And it was finally at a point of recognizing that as it relates at least to this act that was a criminal act, that was an act of violence, and I'm saying this as a former prosecutor, that we are finally saying it is a crime that should be the subject of serious, swift, and severe accountability and consequence whenever it occurs. But there's more work that we've been doing. So again, in a bipartisan way, I have a bill that would reform America's money bail system. Because here's what goes on with that. Here's what happens with that. So two people commit the same crime. They get arrested, they get charged, they show up in jail for their first hearing. And the judge looks at the bail schedule and says, your bail is $20,000, which is about the average bail in the United States. Well, for one person who represents the majority of Americans, they don't have $20,000 sitting around. So then their family might say, well, let's figure out how we can get Auntie out, because she's got young kids at home. And it might be weeks or months before she goes to trial. So they go across the street from the courthouse to what's across the street from every courthouse in America? The bail bondsman. The bail bondsman says, I'll give you the $20,000, but you've got to give me 10%, which you will not get back. So then that family has to try, because that's $2,000, which the average American does not have sitting around. So then that family's going to have to beg, borrow, and steal to get that money. Or if they can't come up with it, maybe the person representing the woman who's in jail might say, well, you know, if you plead guilty, you can get out right away. So even if she has a defensible case, she might plead guilty, especially if she has young children at home and she's a single mother and knows that if she doesn't get home, Child Protective Services might come and take those children. Or she might lose her job from not showing up for work. All because she didn't have the money to pay to get out. Meanwhile, the other person who committed the same offense, if they've got money in their back pocket, gets out. So what this presents is an issue that is not only about criminal justice reform, but also an economic justice issue. So, right, so when I got to DC 2 years ago, I said, you know, I'm gonna try and work in a bipartisan way. So I walked the halls, I'm exaggerating a bit, but I walked the halls of the Senate, knocking on doors, and I finally knocked on the door, I'm exaggerating, but I finally knocked on the door of this fellow by the name of Rand Paul. And I said, hey, he's a Republican from Kentucky. And I said, hey, I'm working on this bill, would you be interested in working on it with me? And I told him about it, and he said yes, and he co-sponsored the bill. And then we wrote an op-ed together that got published. It was actually in the New York Times, got published. It was like on a Thursday. And then he went back to Kentucky, I went back to California, and then it occurred to me I might need to check on him and see if he was still good with this, right? So I got in touch with him. Hey, Rand, how you doing? You people good? You all right? And he said to me, Kamala, Appalachia loves this bill. Because the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. His constituents knew. So those are just some examples. Another piece of legislation that I'm working on is about secure elections. If anyone, well, clearly someone, it is not clear that Russia did interfere in the election of the President of the United States. And so it's actually another bipartisan bill that would upgrade the election infrastructures for the states so that we can avoid or protect ourselves from adversarial nations coming in and interfering with the election of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. So those are some examples.
I love it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So I think now we're going to shift and take a couple of questions from the audience. So the way we're going to do this is we've got some people out here with microphones. So if you'd like to ask a question, if you can raise your hand, and then we'll direct you to one of the microphones. So the gentleman right up here.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Senator Harris. We met in ACLU over the summer. I don't know if you remember me, but hi.
What's your name?
I'm Thomas.
Thomas, nice to see you, Thomas.
Nice to meet you again. My question is, so the US ranks first in incarceration, but 18th in high school graduation.
Yeah.
As president, what solutions or policies do you bring to the table to help reverse the numbers?
Right. That's a wonderful question, Thomas. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. Wonderful. And the way you phrased it in particular, because it makes a point that more people need to appreciate, which is there is a direct connection between public education and public safety. And we've been upside down in the way that we are dealing with that, in that we have put more emphasis in incarcerating people than we have in educating our children. And we're paying a price for that. We're paying a price for that. And it's happening, you know, right here in South Carolina. We need to pay our teachers what they are worth. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, God rest her soul, attended my law school graduation. For most of us who ever have a microphone like this in our hands, we have never achieved this kind of success without the teachers and the public education system that made us who we are. It is the path towards success. So it's about understanding what has value and what is smart. Now let's also relate that to the system of mass incarceration. It is a shame when we look at how we should grade ourselves as it relates to our neighbors around the globe, where we have the highest rates of incarceration of any nation on earth. And part of the failure of our system is that we have emphasized reaction instead of prevention. So that gets back to your point about education. The other issue is that we have had real disparities based on race and based on socioeconomic status in terms of income and wealth. And as a result, we have, in particular, disproportionately incarcerated young black men and young Latino men at rates much higher. And if you do it as compared to other populations for the same crimes, we are still arresting and prosecuting at higher rates, both in terms of incarceration rates as well as arrest rates, which happened before that. And we've got to correct the system around reforming the system. And so it's going to be about a number of things. One, focusing on what we need to do around prevention and where we're going to put the resources. Another is this. Part of the mass incarceration problem in this country has to do with a failed war on drugs. We ended up criminalizing what is in fact a public health issue. And finally, I think folks are starting to see with the tragedy of the opioid crisis in America that it is a public health matter and it should be treated that way. We have got to understand we are throwing away money and we are throwing away human potential and human lives in a broken criminal justice system. And so specifically, it's got to be about continuing to reevaluate and change our sentencing laws. It's going to have to be about, I am a proponent of decriminalizing marijuana. And it is about investing in a public education system. And I'll just give you one more stat. I could go on all day about this. 82% of prisoners in the United States are high school dropouts. An African-American man who is between the age of 30 and 34, who is a high school dropout, is 2/3 likely to be in jail, have been in jail, or dead. There is a direct correlation. Let's put that money in education and put it in people and invest in the potential of our country.
Amen. Amen. All right, let's take a question from over on this side. You have a question down here in the front.
Hello.
Hello, sir.
You're my brother's congresswoman, and he has nothing but great things to say about you.
Thank you.
But my question is, according to a recent Axios article, numbers show that of all the declared potential Democratic candidates, you have the biggest social media footprint. So in light of that, where do you see opportunities to appeal to independent and crossover voters through those social media outlets?
That's a great
Good
question.
question.
That's
Yeah.
a great question. That's a great question. It's, I see social media as another extension of this thing, of a microphone, of an ability to talk with large numbers of people. And it is my hope and intention always that when equipped with this kind of opportunity, I use it in a way that is about elevating public discourse and educating and self-educating about the issues that matter most to people. And so it is my hope and intention that we will be able to use social media in a way that we're talking about. I'll go back to one of the earlier points about the economy. I don't have to tell the folks here that in 99% of the counties in the United States, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. Right? And so educating folks who may not be aware of the fact that we have huge disparities in America, where the top 1% is holding a vast majority of the wealth as compared to everybody else, and we're not working with equal opportunity and access to success, which is why I'm proposing that we actually reform the tax code in a way that if you are paying more than 30% of your income in rent plus utilities, you get a $6,000 tax credit. I plan on using our microphone through social media to talk about the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, almost half American families can't afford a $400 emergency. So what I am proposing is we change the tax code to support middle-class working families in a way that if a family is making less than $100,000 a year, you will receive a tax credit of $500 a month, which will literally talk about closing a loophole, close a divide, and the way that we have assessed it, over 1 million families in South Carolina alone would benefit from that initiative. So it is about elevating the public discourse around what is really impacting people. Talk about the fact that when we're talking about American families and trying to make ends meet, you know, people are walking around touting about, you know, certain people, about talking about, oh, the economy is doing well, the economy is great, the economy is great. Well, you know, when I travel the country, I'm forced to ask the question, great for who? Because when I'm traveling and talking with teachers, for example, who are working 2 jobs, and other professionals, when we are looking at the fact, for the most part, wages have remained stagnant while the cost of living keeps going up, and that's the cost of childcare and gas and rent and housing costs, we know that the economy is not working for working people. And so part of how I intend to use it is, again, elevating public discourse around how we need to be thinking about issues and speak truth, Thank
you. It's a great... We'll take a question from over here, the woman right here sitting down. Yeah.
Thank you. There's so many things that I could say, but good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to say to you that with regard to health care, my parents are deceased. My husband has parents. They're in their 70s, and the father is 80. And we realize that their health care, by the time the money comes out of their check for their Medicare, they don't get Medicaid. They pay for Medicare. They pay for their supplement. His mom's on dialysis. Their medication, practically every dime of their money is for their health care. And I just don't understand how people cannot see that people who worked hard all their life, they own their home, and it's like you got to give up everything to survive. I know people who go to this church who take their insulin halfway. They take part of it. They take their heart medication once a day instead of twice a day. And when are we going to wake up and realize that we have to be our brother's keeper? Because one day it could be us.
That's right.
Amen.
And thank you for having the courage to share your family's story. You're absolutely right, and I hear about that everywhere. That's why we need to have Medicare for all. We've got to have Medicare for all. Because it is not a sign of a civil society that people who have money have access to health care and people who don't, or are just working all their lives, working good jobs, producing value to their community and society, but those bills are beyond anyone's opportunity, any working family's opportunity to afford. We have got to recognize this system is not fair, it is not civil, and it is causing people an extraordinary amount of pain. And for the case of your in-laws and your parents, they should be at a phase of life where they live with dignity and where their needs are met given all that they have contributed and earned. And so a component of how we change the system to improve it is also what we need to do to check the pharmaceutical companies. Because that's what, in your example, and you're right, when families there, and I hear the story of who can't afford insulin or making decisions about how they're gonna moderate their intake so they can pay the rent, right? And let's be clear about how the system works. When you have everybody in the system, such as Medicare, then we can negotiate rates with the pharmaceutical companies on behalf of everyone. Because right now, they are playing us. They're playing us. They are motivated, for the most part, by profit, not health care. And we have to change the system because they're not correcting it on their own. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a system where the large number of us, the majority of the population, can negotiate against them, because the people have the power. And when we create the system where it acknowledges that the people should have the power and not the pharmaceutical companies, we will be in a better place.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for one more question. So, how about someone from over here? Right down here in the front. Yes, sir. Yeah. Please.
Check 1, 2. Oh, you got it. Okay, I'm sorry. Senator Harris, welcome. So my question is about economics in communities like this one. So what policy could you push for, or executive order you could sign, since signing executive orders are in style today, to, let's say, get companies like a Boeing, I'm just throwing some names out, or Amazon, to come in and invest, when I say really invest in this community, to not only bring jobs, but partner up with maybe some of the local community colleges like Trident, and give the people who live in the community, train them, create great paying wages, and maybe create a climate to where, a lot of these neighborhoods, they have millennial kids who moved out. Give those young people incentive. Maybe a group of 10 say, hey, let's go ahead, let's buy a block. Let's go buy 1 or 2 blocks. Let's open up a little coffee shop or a store. All these neighborhoods, food deserts, you see there are no supermarkets. There's no Publix, there's no Harris Teeter. So what could you promise the American people as president, because sometimes Congress might not work with you, but is there something you could do from an executive order standpoint to guarantee that companies would truly invest and make sure that these neighborhoods, the people are not moved out?
Thank you.
So I'd like to believe that we can accomplish what I'm about to propose, because this is actually what is part of what I think needs to happen. I appreciate your points and your observations. One, we've got to put more emphasis and resources into the Small Business Administration to support small businesses in communities such as this, to help reinvest in their communities. As we have known, it is through small businesses, which is about allowing a family to thrive. It is about investing in innovation. It is about investing in a community. Our small business owners always treat their work in a way that is about not only business leadership, but civic leadership. So it's about investing not only in those businesses, but the communities in which those businesses live. So that's one. The other piece is this. So again, about speaking truths. It is well agreed that over the next 15 years, as many as 40% of the jobs that currently exist may not be so plentiful. That's a difficult truth to hear. It's a difficult truth to speak, but we've got to acknowledge that and then have a real plan for investing in the workforce of the 21st century and stop acting like ostriches about it. And stop telling people, oh, we're going to just keep investing in the things that have been without also understanding we also need to look at where we're going and equip folks with a path towards succeeding in those industries and in those professions and with those skills. I frankly think, now you're going to get a longer answer than you expected. We talked about education with an emphasis really on K through 12, but let's also talk about education after high school. So first of all, part of the problem, I believe, is that we have this term higher education, which suggests college education. And again, let's speak some truths. We have created a society where some people think that people who have a college education have greater value than people who don't. And that is wrong, and it is not productive. I frankly think we should be talking about and thinking about, for leaders, what are we doing about education after high school? And then creating meaningful paths for that. Because the reality is, when you look at where jobs are going, what we need to do is invest in skills. And it's not always going to be about a cap and gown, it's going to be about the skills, but we've got to also honor the dignity of work. We have got to honor the value of labor and skilled labor and pay it accordingly, give it the dignity it deserves, and create a pathway. So here's my point. Bureau of Labor Statistics came out with a list of the 20 jobs between 2016 and 2026 that are going to see the greatest amount of growth. And in large part, they're on that list because they're jobs that need to be performed, but also for which we don't have a skilled workforce. Number 1 and number 2 on that list, installation and maintenance of wind turbines and solar paneling. So back to your point about pathways, what are we doing to put priorities around developing the skill sets? And you know, the thing about it, I meet with my friends who are part of the building trades, and look, these are the skills that we already have the capacity to train for. Pipe fitters, welders, electricians. It's all that work. So it's also about people in a position of leadership bringing in the private sector to tell us and give us some idea of the jobs that need to be filled and the skills that need to then be met. It's about bringing in organized labor to help do the apprenticeship programs and the training that organized labor does so well. It's about bringing in our teachers and our colleges and universities. Some of the best are right here in South Carolina. And doing that in a way that recognizes that true leadership is also about collaboration and coalition. And so that's how I think about that.
Thank you. So we've actually got time for another question or two. How about the gentleman right here up front? Oh, do we lose the mic?
No. Sorry.
Here, sir.
Senator, first of all, thank you and welcome to the Low Country. Kind of question I have comes firsthand and comes from a lot of people who have interactions with the police. Yeah. Majority of those, very negative. Find that your First, Fourth, 14th Amendments are violated on a daily. Mm-hmm. What can you do for police reform?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to happen there. So first is that we've got to speak truth and tell the truth that these things happen and they go without consequence and accountability most of the time. Let's speak that truth. Second, let's understand that what we're looking at, for example, under the current administration, is that the Department of Justice has essentially shut down pattern and practice investigations, which the Department of Justice is supposed to do to investigate those cases of misconduct and abuse and violation of your constitutional rights. So as president, just back to the question that was asked, if elected, one of the things I would do immediately is resuscitate those investigations. The other issue is consent decrees, which they've pretty much shut down, which are understandings with a court that where there has been a finding of abuse of power, that there has to be some kind of oversight and implementation of reforms. The other thing we've got to do, and it's something I did when I was Attorney General of California, we created in my office, in that State Department of Justice, the first procedural justice and implicit bias training of law enforcement. Because that has got to be dealt with, and that's going to be about training, but also about discipline when there is bias in law enforcement. And then the final piece is this. We've got to have in place rules and standards by which there can be serious and severe consequence and accountability for violation of the law. And when we have, and I mentioned that earlier, but when we have so many mothers and fathers in our country that have to sit down with their son and have the talk with him and talk to him about how he might be stopped or arrested based on the color of his skin or the neighborhood in which he lives. We know we've got a real system of injustice in this country that needs to be corrected, and it needs to happen immediately.
Amen.
So thank you for that.
That was great. Thank you. And we're going to go, this woman here in the purple, she's very excited for our final question.
Thank you so much for coming to South Carolina. JFK said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Right.
What can we do for Kamala Harris? I want you to give us 3 takeaways, whether it brings somebody to the polls, make a contribution to your campaign, have a house party, tell us
We've never met, I'm just going to say.
Tell us what we can do for you, please.
Thank you. Well, you started by being here, and I thank you for that. And for all of you, everybody, there are so many other things you could be doing with your time. But you've taken the time to be here, and your time is valuable. And I appreciate and thank you for your interest and for your participation. There are a number of things. The first point you mentioned about voting is very real. Let's put it in context. In 2013, in a case called Shelby v. Holder, the United States Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act. And what we saw is almost immediately, and up until the most recent elections in 2018, that legislators and legislative bodies put in place laws that were designed and found by courts to be intended to restrict or suppress folks' right to vote. And in particular, black folks, students, and poor folks, and Native Americans, and Latinos, and you could go on down the list. And so until we actually can correct that, and again, we need to do that in the United States Congress, and I hope people have the courage to do that. Until we can get that reversed, part of what we need to do, and remember, even in North Carolina, there was that case where the court found with surgical precision that the legislature put in place a law to suppress the vote. Until we can get that corrected, what we do know, guys, is that in 2020, there will again be attempts to suppress the vote. So knowing that ahead of time, we're gonna have to put extra effort into reminding folks of their right to vote, and as much as we can as a community of friends and family, figure out how at a local level we are going to facilitate and make it easy for people to get to the polls. And so I would encourage us through our church associations, through our social associations, through our work associations and friendships and relationships to start thinking about how we can focus on getting people registered to vote and making sure that in our communities it is easy for people to vote, because it should not be difficult to be a member of a democracy and exercise your constitutional right. So I would start there, and then let's just remind people, elections matter. Elections matter. And so let's encourage those conversations where we talk about the connection between the fact that who's in the White House will make a difference in terms of public education policy and where those federal dollars will go, and if they will go to support what we need to do to strengthen public education in America. It will matter who's in the White House when we talk about an existential threat to us as human beings, which is climate change. It will matter who can run the Department of Justice and put in place policies that are about reforming America's criminal justice system. It will matter. It will matter. And right now, as we mentioned earlier, this is an inflection point. What we do now will have a profound impact on generations to come. And we can make a difference. And you all know that. I'm preaching to the choir. Let's just get out there and remind people of their power and the power of the people.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming. Give it up for Senator Kamala Harris.